Welcome to SSI Meetup. Today we will be talking about the Trust Over IP organization that we will be talking about a lot today. As you know, Drummond Reed was one of our first guests. Well, no, he was not one of the first. He was the first guest and has been collaborating extensively with SSI Meetup. He told me that we could do this as a sneak into what is happening at the Trust Over IP Foundation. And I'm really happy that we can do this. And I think it will help the global SSI community to learn more about this. We have Daryl O'Donnell and Mike Vesey, who will be joining him, and two of the driving forces behind this too, together with other people. They will let us know more about all this. But before we jump into all these details, let us go to the second slide where we'll briefly explain what SSI Meetup is about for the people that haven't heard about SSI Meetup before or didn't see any of the other webinars. Basically, what we're trying to do is empower global SSI communities, and this is open to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a company, association, an individual, anywhere in the world. All the content that is being published here is shared with the Creative Commons by share alike license, which basically means that it's open source and you can reuse it. That means you can create your own communities locally, or you can reuse the material in any way you see fit. You just need to give credit back to the people creating it, which is today the Trust Over IP team and to SSI Meetup. And this is webinar 55, so you have plenty of other content where you can cover all kind of different details. And as the SSI space grows, I think you will be able to use all that. If you have any questions during this presentation, you can bring them up at any point of time. I'll be sharing those questions with Drummond, Mike, and Daryl. And you can use the question tool for that. And if not, you can ask your questions at the end too. And without further ado, it will be Drummond who will be giving an introduction to who Daryl and Mike are, and start talking a little bit about what the Trust Over IP Foundation is.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's a great pleasure to be back here with breaking news that just literally hit the wire a few hours ago. Let's start out with introducing our other panelists. Daryl, you want to go?
Sure. Thanks, Drum. I'm Daryl O'Donnell. I'm the founder of Continuum Loop. We're kind of a boutique consultancy. We work with people who are innovating at the edges of technology. In this case, for the last 3-4 years, it's been in this self-sovereign identity space. We're helping our clients take the technology into reality, typically early stage projects, proof of concepts through to beginning the commercialization process, at which point we typically disengage and things move into more of a market development type of a role. And happy to say there's a couple clients we'll be speaking about a little bit later. That's it for me.
Excellent. Thanks, Daryl. Super. And Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Drummond. Mike Vesey, I'm CEO of IDRamp, and IDRamp is for some time in their identity challenges, helping them build more secure and better leverage things like service delivery. And we are very excited to be able to offer an extension of those services by way of some of the technology we're going to talk about today. And we've integrated that into our delivery platform. So we're thrilled to be here supporting this great cause.
Excellent, and we are thrilled to have you. And we'll explain more about how both of you are very involved with Trust Over IP here and during this webcast. And for folks that haven't seen one of my earlier webcasts, at Evernym, I have the position of Chief Trust Officer. I also have been a trustee of the Sovereign Foundation, where I co-chair the governance working group. And I work on my favorite spec of my entire career. I'm a co-editor of the Decentralized Identifier spec, DIDs at W3C, which is making excellent progress. I think we're going to be at feature freeze here within pretty shortly, and take it down through the rest of the W3C process to become finalized. But enough about DIDs. We've done whole webinars on those. Today, we're here to give you some breaking news about Trust Over IP, and we'll pop right into that. We are announcing the newest member of the Linux Foundation, which if folks aren't familiar, besides Linux, the most widely used open source software in the world, I think it's the world's largest open source project. There are over 240 other projects, the Linux Foundation, of all kinds and sizes. And the newest one is the Trust Over IP Foundation. And again, the announcement just went out this morning. We have The announcement actually talked about 29 founding members, but we had a new one join last night, and so it's actually up to 30. And I'm very pleased to say that Continuum Loop and ID Ramp are 2 of those founding members. Congratulations, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
All right, so what we're going to do today here is we're just going to explain more, answer a whole bunch of questions. We're going to have sort of a dialogue between the 3 of us as we go through explaining about the Trust Over IP Foundation, and then when we're done, please just queue up your questions. Alex, if you see any question that's particularly pressing, we can do it, you know, as we're talking. But we're definitely leave plenty of room for Q&A about this at the end. So let's start out right away with this is as we were out talking with other prospective founding members. This is the purpose statement that we used for Trust Over IP. And for anyone that's seen the webinars that we've done on this topic, you'll be very familiar with the Trust Over IP stack, and we like to, you know, talk about it as a complete architecture for internet scale digital trust. And it combines the cryptographic trust we need between machines with the human trust that we actually need to solve real business, legal, and social problems with digital trust. And guys, I don't think we need to spend a bunch of time here talking about just how severe those problems are around the internet. I think it's one of the best known areas today, and there are many other SSI Meetup webinars that talk about those. So we're mostly going to be talking about solutions and how we get to that over interoperable. Now, many folks who have seen our webinars before have seen the stack, the 4 layers here, and we'll be talking more about the specifics. But the most distinguishing feature you'll see right away is it is a dual stack. It is a stack of both. How do we have interoperable technology at the 4 layers you need to address digital trust, but also the governance, and this next most recent version of it, we reinforce that you have governance, different types of governance frameworks and governance authorities at all 4 of these layers. As we have been in the last couple weeks preparing for the launch and really an intensive dialogue about Trust Over IP with, as I said, the now 30 founding members and many press and analysts that we've been briefing about this, we finally had one of those ahas that we were constantly talking about the governance stack being the most distinguishing feature, the thing that was not being addressed anywhere else in any other organization or forum. And we finally said, we need to switch around how we're talking about this stack. And this is the new, you know, more you know, carefully designed version of the stack. But the big difference is we now lead with governance. You know, if in the Western world, as we lead left to right, it really suggests that solving the issues of digital trust starts with governance, and then that maps into the technology you need to support that. And I'm gonna stop and ask Mike and Daryl to share their point of view on this shift in emphasis on the stack.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'll take that first, Daryl, if you don't mind. I mean, I think it's brilliant. I spent the first half of my career on the right side, right? I was down in the weeds developing the highly technical solutions, and it took me a long time to realize that technology comes and goes and it evolves, but put in the right vehicle, put in the right container, is what it allows it to really nurture and grow. And so by leading out with a governance stack that provides an overarching umbrella to all of the different projects and technologies that are going to be developing and being developed over the coming years, is really the difference maker here. That's the reason that it's going to be adopted by enterprise organizations. It's going to be adopted by government institutions. It's the governance layer that really sets it apart. So I think it's an ingenious move, and you know, it's definitely the right way to go about it, from my opinion.
Super.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. It's interesting. I came from the same approach. To me, technology was 95% of the solution. in my first company, and now I'm almost upside down on that, in that the technology is crucial, but without the governance side, there's no way to really get to scale. There's no way to really get inserted without ending up stuck with a particular technology, which I don't think anybody in the community that we're working in is, knowing that, 10 years from now, this particular technology is going to be the one and only solution. Having that governance, though, helps us answer the business questions when people come up to you and say, well, how do I even start? If they're not running some sort of a cutting edge dev lab, they don't even know who we are, or they've heard about who we are. They've heard about the various different crazy projects that are, I mean, when I say crazy, I mean in a good way, where things are being changed and there's new approaches, but they have no idea how to start consuming it. By putting the governance in place, we can say, hey, listen, if you want to talk about layer one, where you have your DIDs are anchored, where you have in some worlds cred defs are anchored, they don't have to live there, but you have this effectively what becomes a very boring layer one pretty quickly. You still have to run it, you have to know who's running it, is it public, is it private, is it permission, is it permissionless, but you can have the governance rules in place, and then you can add more and more networks and more layer one networks over time. The governance allows you to do that. That's not a tech problem. If we lead with the tech, we just won't hit that kind of a scale.
Yeah, I totally agree. And leading with trust, right? Because trust it will sustain. Technology comes and goes. I had someone ask me not too long ago. They asked me, "Is this it? Is this technology the technology that's going to transform everything, and we're all going to evolve to that?" And I said, "No, absolutely not. But it's a hell of a good start. It's right. We're on the right path, and it's going to evolve and it's going to grow. So putting out, this is the technology that never works, especially when you're trying to go into organizations who are fearful right now, going through the identity life cycles that the enterprise in the world today goes through is excruciatingly painful. They start, they build, they grow, they adopt, and then it's time to start again because there's new bells and whistles and new features and gadgets that they have to plug in. And so that they're always in a constant state of motion, and that's a very expensive place to be. So this stack and the governance with this stack provides a framework that can really now start to transform the way that everyone in the world, including industry and the big sources of revenue that are going to drive this, can adopt, and it allows a natural synergy of consumers and citizens. So I, as a citizen, am now really I'm partnered. I'm cryptographically partnered with my employer, right? I don't have something created, another copy of myself that my employer is holding and saying, this is you. No, I'm me. So just associate with me. So it really is a beautiful story as it starts to unfold, and it allows all these natural synergies to happen. So it's really exciting, and everybody that is listening to this is very fortunate to be here and now when this really starts. I believe this is going to transform the way we think of trust and technology.
Well, you're preaching to the choir on this side. I strongly agree with you. While we're at the stack here, and Daryl was talking about layer one, I want to emphasize that as we developed the stack over the last 18 months, we really realized that we use this term governance frameworks, and we have this whole governance stack. But the governance you need at these levels is quite different. It's a little bit, I mean, to use a broad analogy, the governance you need in a city, as opposed to a state in the U.S. or a member nation in the EU, versus the governance you need over an entire nation, or in the EU's case, a whole union of nations. It's different. It's all governance, but the policies and the structure of what you're trying to govern is different. And that's why we recognize that what we're trying to communicate here is that at all these four layers, what the Trust Over IP stack will enable is different governance authorities around the world of any kind, of any size. Some people see governance authority and they say, this is just for governments. And I want to stress, governments are one of the best known types of governance authorities, but they're hardly the only one. You've got all kinds. You've got consortia. You've got communities, NGOs, individual companies, universities, cities, all of them can be governance authorities for their trust communities. Again, any size, any scale, wherever it is. What they do is they get together and say, what are our business requirements? And therefore, what are the policies we need to put in place that will engender trust among the members of our trust community? And these check marks here at all 4 layers are standardized roles that we've already identified exist for governance frameworks, for most governance frameworks at that level. It doesn't mean every governance authority will have every role for their particular trust community, and there will certainly be other roles that you don't see here on the list. These 3 roles, for instance, at layer 1, those apply to public permissionless blockchain utilities, such as the sovereign network, or other Hyperledger Indy-based networks that are coming, utility networks that are coming. There'll be more announcements, I think, all the rest of this year about other layer 1 public utilities like the sovereign network or the VerifOne network. I want to point out right away, especially to the audience for SSI Meetup, those are public permission networks. Layer 1 utilities can be permissionless networks, right? There are DID methods. There are, I think, at least 3 for Bitcoin. I think there are now 7 or 8 for Ethereum. Those can all serve as utilities. The whole thing is the trust you have in a particular DID method is based on what is the governance of that utility. Some will have very explicit governance frameworks. Some, like Bitcoin, have no explicit governance framework. It's basically informal governance of a set of developers. But the bottom line is it's whatever works for you, for your community. The abstraction layer that makes it a clear layer is the DID specification from W3C that allows agents and wallets at layer 2 to talk to any of those utilities via the DID method to be able to resolve a DID, get back the public key, service endpoint, other metadata needed at layer 2 and layer 3. So I just wanted to provide that example to make it clear we're moving, the Trust Over IP stack enables what we call a network of networks at layer 1 for the cryptographic roots of trust. But then it allows for agents and wallets at layer 2 to be completely independent of any specific DID method and to be interoperable. And since we're on the stack here and I want to make these sort of key points, Daryl, I know you've done an SSI Meetup, an entire report on agents and wallets at layer 2. Do you want to say anything further about how critical it is that layer be independent of layer 1?
I mean, that's one of the key parts of governance that came out of the digital wallet research that we did. We punched that report out last March, and Alex, thanks for having me on. Part of the hard part, one of the things that many governments, banks, I know there's some in some ways on the decentralization spectrum, they're not, but the realities. They're asking the question, whose wallet can I trust? Well, if you have no governance, if you have no way of answering that question, can I trust? And I jokingly in the report and in discussions talk about Bubba's wallet showing up in the App Store. Can I trust that? Can it, work with layer 1, whether that be Bitcoin, Ethereum, Hyperledger Indy, network like Sovereign? Can it work with it? Great, on a technical basis it can, but who's vetted that it isn't doing something? Maybe it turns out that North Korea funded Bubba's wallet. And yes, it works on the various different crypto things, but every bit of data you create in that app is off-gassed over to someone in North Korea. You're going to need to have these accreditation frameworks that no one's going to want to reinvent. That's part of what we're going to be doing at the Trust Over IP Foundation, is helping build the templates for those governance frameworks, because even that one little question, can I trust Bubba's wallet, is it's a really big loaded question.
Totally, and that's we don't have any provider governance frameworks. Other people ask me, are there examples yet? And my answer is not yet, but get ready. They're coming soon as we start to have a bunch of vendors of agents, wallets, and interoperability. And as you said, privacy, security, data protection is something that that consumers, businesses, governments are going to want to see certification for. So Mike, layer 3, that's the trust triangle behind verifiable credentials, the issuer, holders, and verifiers. You want to say a little bit about the role of credential governance frameworks in the adoption of new credentials at layer 3?
Sure. Yeah, it's so what layer 3 to me it provides the ability for an issuer, and we really have to understand, I mean, it's important to understand issuer and who those issuers might be, right? Those issuers can be literally anyone, and you can develop, as you were just saying, Daryl was explaining, a governance framework, no matter who you are and who you're affiliated with. It might just be your company, right? And you can really make this as granular as possible, and that's why the whole stack is so important, because you can still plug in and use these same tools and be that issuer, and be the authoritative source that issues that particular credential for the holder. And the really cool part about that is then your verifiers can do that independently. And so I know I'm drawing this out, and we probably have a pretty highly educated audience, but it's really important. And this is the aha moment I get when we're explaining this all the time, that it's really important to understand that holder is presenting that credential directly to that verifier, who is independently verifying that, not back to the issuer, right? They're just making sure all of that was signed and is legitimate and is governed, right, underneath the network, so they know they can trust that signature. And that's so transformative to the existing ecosystem that's out there today for any kind of identity management, that it really bears a very explicit call out here, because it will literally transform the way that those systems interact with individuals and other organizations. So in a lot of cases, a verifier may not have to. The world today, usernames and passwords, everybody is verifying something that they've issued, right? And this dramatically changes the world at this level. So I can verify against something that I just know to be true. I don't necessarily have to issue it. And that really simplifies life quite a bit. So not sure if I directly answered your question, but that's the big value I see coming out of that layer 3.
Absolutely. Every time I talk about the trust triangle and verifiable credentials, I point right here and I say, by making it these two legs and cryptographically verifiable, you remove that need for verifiers to be integrated with issuers directly. And this, phoning home that happens, that is such a privacy issue, it is a complete game changer. There are no identity protocols at internet scale today that solve that problem without that integration leg. And by setting that free, it is ironic. And in the white paper that we just published this morning on the site, we call it's back to the future, right? We've been using paper and plastic credentials to do decentralized identity and trust for centuries, right? And now we're finally, with this infrastructure, able to bring that to the internet.
Drummond, I mean, you've been answering this, but Attila, he's just concretely asking about this. So just wanted to bring up his question. He's saying, so anyone can become an issuer of credentials in a web of trust way? That's what he's asking.
Yes, I want to reinforce that. Absolutely. Anyone can be an issuer, anyone can be a holder, anyone can be a verifier. And by anyone, we mean person, organization, or thing. The Internet of Things is relevant here. I know, Alex, you had entire SSI Meetup webinars on the Internet of Things and SSI. But think in the case of a sensor or device that's might be out in an oil pipeline. It can actually be putting out credentials, signed information, and writing it to whatever holder. It might be to a credential registry of information about the sensor readings on that pipeline, and they can now be accessed and verified by anyone that needs to rely on them, including regulators. So yes, people, organizations.
Can I add something to that, Drum?
You bet.
Because the answer you give is correct. Anybody can be an issuer. The question is, should I trust you as an issuer? Which is where we get to the heart of what the Trust Over IP Foundation is about, which is governance. Here's an example. I can imagine, I'm from Canada, I can imagine an enterprising young kid from New Brunswick, once Canada starts issuing digital driver's licenses in a verifiable credential form, New Brunswick might be behind the curve, but I can see a high school student issuing New Brunswick driver's licenses to his buddies and or any good friend who pays him an equivalent of $25 on the internet, whether that's Bitcoin or cash, and you have no idea that that issuer was not really a bona fide issuer of a driver's license. You need a governance framework that you can walk back and find out, oh, hang on, New Brunswick isn't in the official list of digital driver's license issuers, therefore I'm not accepting it. So because everybody becomes an issue, can be an issuer, you have this counter problem. You need the governance to determine which issuers you can even consider trusting.
Bingo. I can't emphasize that enough. We always get that question about verifiable credentials. How can I verify the issuer? And what I talk about is the governance trust triangle, and that's of course one of the roles of any credential governance framework will be how does it determine. In some cases, it will be a very small list. In other cases, it can be a very large network. We use the examples. We'll talk more about MasterCard here shortly, of a network the size of MasterCard. You have to have a service for dynamically determining is a particular bank, for instance, authoritative issuer of a MasterCard, and that's exactly how it can scale, which nicely takes us up to layer 4.
Drummond,
yeah,
just a question about how we want to manage, because questions are accumulating here. I mean, some of them, they might be relevant right now for what you're talking about right now, since you have many more slides, as I know. How do you want to manage that? Do you want me to bring them all up at the end, or you want to answer some of them right now? I mean, whatever you prefer.
Sure. I'm going to ask the Alex editorial judgment. If there's a question that's really applicable, we're just going to talk briefly about layer 4 and then move on in the slides. But if it's a question about what we just covered and it's we could do it now. Otherwise, we'll just handle them at the end.
Then what I'll do is the following. I'll bring up only those questions that are that fit really well for the current slide, and everything else we can cover it at the end, because the more general questions that are really interesting, but maybe you can just then cover them all at the end, and then we see how we answer them all together. Okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, I just wanted, before we leave this slide, I want to make sure that, again, credential governance framework is very straightforward in many ways about, what issuers will issue what credentials under what policies to what holders, under what levels of assurance for what verifiers, right? It's very specific to the trust triangle. But when you move over to the ecosystem layer, now you're talking about entire ecosystems of applications. And therefore, an ecosystem governance framework is inherently broader. It literally is a governance framework for potentially all the governance frameworks below it. An example I like to use there is what's called the Internet of Education. There are literally thousands of universities and tens of thousands of secondary institutions and learning institutions all over the world that issue all kinds of credentials to students, alumni that about the learning that they've had. And now they're looking at SSI and the Trust over IP stack verifiable credentials as, we can finally create an overall interoperable ecosystem for the interactive learner record. And but there are so many involved that they really need to be moving up to the level of a digital trust ecosystem. They call it the Internet of Education, and which can establish overall rules. For instance, to Daryl's point, who in all of those institutions, how do you know that they are a member of that ecosystem? That's what a member directory function is for. How do you know that they're actually abiding by their governance framework? Auditors, auditor accreditors allow that to scale to any size. And there are many different examples. We have some members of Trust Over IP that we'll mention here shortly who have joined specifically because they recognize they want to create entire digital trust ecosystems. So I think we've really drilled down into the 4 layers. Mike or Daryl, unless you have anything else here, we'll keep going.
No, it sounds great.
Yep.
All right. So one of the questions I suppose many people have, okay, yet another foundation, right? And as we've just explained, there literally is no place that is defining this overall stack both sides, governance and technology. There's certainly many organizations working on components of the technology stack, and we are indicating here the ones that we already have components or that are being incorporated into the stack. The first three are SDOs, standard development organizations, W3C, both verifiable credentials and DIDs. ITF is standardizing a key component of layer 2, the JSON web messaging proposal that actually came out of the work going on at Hyperledger and now at DIDCOM at DIF. OASIS is the potential home for the decentralized key management specifications that have been under development for quite a while. Then we have Hyperledger, where of course a lot of the code components, Hyperledger Indy is a layer 1 project, Aries is layer 2 and 3, and also uses Hyperledger Ursa shared crypto library at all 3 layers. OpenID is, even though it's not a verifiable credential protocol, it's a federation protocol, but there's a lot of OpenID infrastructure out there that we need to be able to be interoperable with. And so that's another liaison relationship. And then lastly, Decentralized Identity Foundation is where several of the components of the stack, most notably the DIDCOM protocol, which is the narrow waist protocol at layer 2, that's a working group now at DIF that was started in collaboration with Hyperledger and lives at DIF now. So there are probably a lot of questions folks have, but we just want to make it clear the purpose of the Trust Over IP Foundation is to take those components and compose them into interoperable, the full stack on the technical side, but then most importantly, turn around and define the models, templates, and best practices for governance frameworks that actually drive the use and the technology decisions for trust communities all around the world. So Mike and Daryl, I know you're both involved with multiple of these organizations. Your thoughts on this?
Sure, Daryl, I'll let you go.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the groups that I'm working with are not afraid to invest in the space. They're curious on where they need to invest. And, we hear things like CU Ledger, for example, we're big behind the W3C verifiable credentials DIDs. We look at, I used to chair, as you did, Drum, an OASIS standard. We know there's going to be work there. We're willing to invest there, but the whole reason is, why are we doing it? What is the business and governance behind it that's going to drive the technology so that we can be interoperable, so we can have things just being taken care of at some point in time, like plumbing? That's why we need to make this, this push the tech stack, push the SDOs and the technology development areas with those, as you note, in their consideration requirements, the spec needs that we've got, and then get the feedback that says, oh, hey, yeah, we weren't quite as crisp on that. We hadn't thought of that particular edge case, that corner case that you've come up with. Let's go back and see where we find that kind of stuff. So it's an easier place for business right now, and government especially, to invest in.
Yep, I completely agree with that. That's where I would go as well. The foundation, the Trust Over IP Foundation, is relatable, and it is understandable. And the customers, the IT managers, the C-levels looking to reduce, increase security, reduce user friction, evolve their platforms, move the world forward. They don't really spend a lot of time digging through W3C and DIF and those standards. Trust Over IP really provides the consolidation of that. It's that unified view. Here's all this stuff and how it works together, plays together, how you can secure it and regulate it, and it's all very well defined and easy to understand.
Wonderful. And what we have here is we'll drill down into that a little bit by sharing some slides that we used as we were, going through and discussing with the different founding members that were coming to the table, out of many of them out of the SSI community, but not exclusively. That's one of the, I think, key things Alex, that I would want the SSI Meetup audience to take away is Trust over IP is a superset of what SSI. It's everything that SSI was about, but it also now extends to all forms of trust relationships and data sharing that will go on that can use this infrastructure. So when we wanted to answer the question, so what is the market gap that we're really filling with this organization? I just picking some in the background. What we found the easiest way, I mean, many folks are now becoming familiar with the DID and verifiable credential standards, and there's a lot of market interest in them. They see it, they get it. Verifiable credentials and portable digital identity, and the fact you don't have to integrate everywhere using federation protocols. The challenge is that interest is also leading to a whole lot of innovation and lack of interoperability in the space. Very much like the internetworking, the early explorations of internetworking before we had the internet. And so we need to find out how to do, to get to that coherence and consolidation, because if we don't, we'll be in the same situation. The sort of networking wars that took place in the 70s, where there was no clear picture of how to internetwork. They held back, the internet. But once that was solved with the TCP/IP stack, it exploded, right? That's what we're aiming to do with Trust over IP stack, is bring together these exciting new technologies into a coherent, interoperable stack. Again, both governance and technology, so we can have that explosion of new innovations that are made possible by digital trust. So I'll stop there. Again, Mike or Daryl, commentary on that?
Yeah, I mean, great overview, and it definitely draws the synergies and the between the perception of TCP/IP and what it did for the networking challenges we had in the late 90s, and Trust over IP is the same thing, right? This is taking I'm old enough to remember this, our collection of frame relay networks that we deployed for our enterprise, and we replaced those. We cut cost by 90%. We increased performance. We increased security with the advent of encrypted VPN tunnels and things. And Trust over IP is exactly that in the trust ecosystem, and that's why it's so exciting to see it all come together.
I agree. I would just add that the thing we didn't do then was build trust into the network. We're kind of backfilling that one in a big way.
Hindsight, right? Yeah, you're right.
It's an extremely good point. That's why we talk about internet not having this identity and trust layer. And by the way, I've had that conversation a number of times. I don't blame the internet architects of TCP/IP. It was an amazing innovation at its time. I think that the level of complexity of the problems we are now solving with Trust over IP stack, I don't blame them for not taking on. But you're absolutely right, Daryl. That's what was missing. So let's talk a little bit about the market problems that the stack is aimed at, and this is where I'm gonna proxy John Jordan, another one of the leading the team for emerging digital initiatives at the province of BC in Canada, be one of the leaders in the founding the Trust over IP stack, and in fact the man who came up with the term Trust over IP to try and describe what you could do, the sort of full potential of this stack. And John loves to really point out, today, every internet identity we have is rooted on an account someplace. And that means we have baked intermediaries into all our digital relationships. Anytime you log on or use a federated system in order to get from one place to another, to prove one thing to another, you're using your accounts. The fundamental, as we talked about with the stack, by moving to cryptographic verifiable digital credentials, we no longer have to do that. We are, as he puts it, we're card-carrying members of whatever community we're part of. And we can carry that card wherever it has value to any verifier that can recognize that. And we don't have to go through accounts and our accounts and our intermediaries to do that. And yes, this does, I mean, SSI Meetup, you've seen many demonstrations. We get to passwordless authentication and sort of instant authorization for things that otherwise, you know, have required paper documents to be either faxed or carried to do things like qualifying for loans or you know, applying for employment. These things will now be able to be done digitally with a lot less friction. And we also, one of the, at layer 2, the fact that every time you form a connection, that connection belongs to you and the other peer forever. And it's can be used for any form. At layer 3, we don't just call out credential exchange. That's one thing you can do over that connection, but you can do all kinds of other private trusted data exchange and messaging. And those connections last literally for as long as you and the other party want them. And they're all cryptographically verifiable, so you can have full audit trails when you need them for regulatory compliance. So now we're really into, and the last point, again, I'm parroting John Jordan here, who also coined the term verifiable origins. It means one of the broad scale uses we'll see is verifiable supply chains for any kind of product that, you know, that goes through that, whether it's food or in the case of BC Gov, they're focused on energy. Their province's biggest industry. Being able to prove that energy was, for instance, sustainably mined and shipped and delivered and that, you know, things like carbon credits have been accounted for, can make a big difference in how we treat our environment and you know, the economy of a province like BC. So these are all examples. I don't know, Mike and Daryl, you want to call out any more specific ones that you're working closely to?
Yeah, I would say energy is a very interesting one, and it definitely is going to have a great future with verifiable sources and verifiable origins. One thing I'll point out on the previous slide, you were referencing a little bit the relationship in the passwordless login, and I'll say from personal experience when dealing with the technology. When you show someone a passwordless login, it's kind of, you get that, oh yeah, that's really cool moment. But when you send a message down that pipe without any interaction that is, and they actually get it, that it's secure and that it's a conduit between you and that device that is intermediary free, that's kind of the aha moment. That's when people actually get it. And that is really the power of this connection. We're not just logging in without a password. We're logging in without a password and never consulting the identity management system that issued you the credential or gave you that authorization and an approval to log into that service. And, you know, I read somewhere in a report that like 75% right now of the identity of the IT budget in a corporate enterprise is going toward their identity management systems, because they're full of spikes and valleys, right? At 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, they're getting hit really hard, so they're scaling up, and then they're sitting idle all night, so they're scaling down, and that's the nature of this. It's the massive single point of failure and honeypot of data. So that system and anything we can do to decrease the reliance and dependency on that system is definitely a step in the right direction. And this technology can literally render its importance, trivialize its importance rather.
Yep, very much so. Daryl, anything to add to?
I'm good.
All right.
I know we want to get to the who it is. There we go.
Yeah, let's get to the who's, right? Folks are wondering. So who has come to trust over IP? So we have two categories. Actually, there are three, but we actually have all members falling into two categories. So one is called steering members. That is paid membership in the foundation that then qualifies that member to have a member of the steering committee. And we're looking at expanding the steering committee because we had more steering members than we expected in the first. So I actually need two slides. I've captured this right off the website as it was getting updated in real time all the way through last night. So they're alphabetical here. We've
You don't
heard.
mind me jumping in on a couple, Drum, real
Oh,
quick?
please do. That's what I was about to invite.
So, well, I thank you for putting me right dead center. I guess that's the alphabet. But CU Ledger is one company that's a client. So I'm the chief technology officer for them. To Mike's point earlier, one of the first thing that CU Ledger is doing is making it easier to prove you really are the member who is trying to call a call center or log in through the web. We don't want to treat you like a criminal from a credit union, but they asked all these weird questions to make sure it really is you. So they're streamlining that. I also advise BC Gov. What's interesting about both those groups is they're not afraid of investing in technology, but they also know how big the space is and how big the problem is that we're solving by introducing, internet scale trust, that we're willing to invest, but no one has enough resources, not even the big Accentures, and you'll see some other big ones on the next slide, has enough to carve out the whole problem. We can start solving one part, but then we need to lean on each other to make sure that we figure out those other parts that are unique or haven't been discovered yet. So CU Ledger especially is looking at what are the templates that it can use. BC Gov is looking for templates for contracts and/or is willing to build a template that says, hey, here are the specs you need to use in order to use a full trust over IP tech stack. Here are the specs you should put in your RFPs, your request for proposals. That allows other governments and other companies to slot that in, helps us as an industry grow really, really quickly. So the fact that they're willing to invest in that, I think is fantastic for all of us.
Yeah, no, I strongly agree. There's a story literally behind every company that's here. We've talked about British Columbia. BrightHive is focused entirely on data trusts. A whole new area where a community literally says we need to share data between all of us for our mutual benefit, but we need to do so safely. And the number one issue to do that is governance. So that's one of the reasons they're there. Daiwei's one of the leaders in the in India and developing a number of products and services based on the SSI stack. Asatis, one of the leading enterprise identity and access management companies in Germany that saw SSI really, they were one of the first 10 sovereign stewards, I recall that. And we could go on and on. I'm going to actually get to the second slide of founding members, and well, there's ID Ramp. So Mike, maybe you want to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll add a couple of add-ons to Daryl's comments. But the really cool thing about this is we've had, and this isn't just one conversation or two conversations. We have conversations with companies that are really large and really interested in the technology. And the first thing, we go through and we have that initial meeting and we talk about the tech and we talk about, and the initial thing that I'd say half of them say, well, gosh, we need to be stewards on a layer layer one utility network, or we need to be. And I go, no, you don't. I mean, you really don't. I mean, they want to contribute and they want to be part of the journey, right? But the reason that the trust over IP stack is so valuable is it provides a home for every one of these things, and it really segregates and separates all of the different activities. And those organizations can come in. They don't necessarily have to be steering members. They don't have to be providing those technical services. They can come in and still be part of the group, part of the story, and help guide and contribute without making a huge contribution or investment in resources or technology. So it's a really, really great container for that type of interaction across the different players that might want to be interested.
You bet. And I just actually got a message from Andre Kudra, CIO of Asatis, that says he's here on the webinar with us, so he can join us in answering questions as soon as we get there. I'll point out here, Lumedic is one of the healthcare companies that has joined because they are big believers in the future of digital credentials and the healthcare system. They're US based, but they believe that they're going to make a big difference in healthcare worldwide. SICPA may not be a household name, but for folks that do know them, They're the Swiss company that actually produces much of the world's verifiable documents, as in passports and currencies for many countries. They recognize verifiable credentials as a whole new extension of what they're doing. And then there are these two circles over here, sort of mysterious. Who could that be, guys?
Looks a little bit like MasterCard.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I mean, I'd certainly seen them often enough, but I didn't realize they'd gone to the point of it's just the circles now that that they're involved with. And I'm thrilled. MasterCard's actually been very involved in the startup of the foundation, and I think has quite some plans for where they want to go. Obviously, one of the largest networks in the world, and certainly largest existing governance frameworks of a network like that. So I think there is going to be its opportunity to mention two launch events on Thursday, May 7th. One is at 8 in the morning Pacific time for the US and EU audience, and then another one at 6 in the evening Pacific time for the APAC audience. And we'll have, I think it's 14 of the founding members will be on a panel there, including the two of you and myself. So lots more about that there. Let's move on to our contributing members. This is the other category of membership, and a whole bunch of interesting. We can spend the whole rest of the webinar talking about all of the fascinating stories here. A number of these founding members will also be on that panel. So I'm recognizing we want to leave time for Q&A. So I'm going to keep moving on here. I want to cover the last thing is, so with this new foundation, what are we actually going to be doing there? And there are going to be 4 working groups. There's a steering committee composed of representatives of the companies you saw on the first 2 of the slides. And we've got these 4 working groups. Daryl, do you want to give us a quick rundown on what these groups will be doing?
Yep, I'll just do a real quick one. It's like we're on time. Yes, the tech stack is going to be working with various different groups out there, helping with both specifications, whether that be at an SDO or one of the groups that are actually developing some of the tech, but also helping on the testing requirements, make sure that they understand the overall big picture. The governance stack is going to help creating some of those, the models, the templates and guidelines and best practices for other groups that are managing either at layer 1, layer 2, 3, 4, depending on where they are in the system. The utility foundry is looking at layer 1 specifically, taking a look at saying, okay, listen, I know you need to stand up, and Drummond's alluded to, there's numerous in the Hyperledger Indy realm that are standing up. They don't want to duplicate everything. They want to be able to look and say, what are the best practices on running and operating a network? Can you at least set us some sort of rules of the game on how we can go and find proper vendors and vet them out? Similar to the ecosystem side is where you get into the deeper governance, as Drummond just alluded to, mentioned. MasterCard fundamentally, to me at least, is a governance network. It is a trust framework that it covers, in this case, all of the layers. They're looking at the future, but they know trust so well, as do any company that's been in this space. There's a lot to learn from each other. That's what the ecosystem is about, is how do you build and incentivize these ecosystems that they're already there, or they're just starting. How do we start that process going?
Bingo. Thanks, Daryl. And I want to emphasize again, if I passed over on that last slide, membership in the Trust Over IP Foundation is open to any individual, any organization in the world, and at the contributor level, there is no cost at all. You can you do have to agree to the intellectual property rules that are any standards organization maintains in order to prevent patent trolls and other bad behavior. But other than that, there is no barrier to participation. So if you're listening and saying, I want to be part of any of these, or you even want to come and say, oh, there's another working group that makes sense here, you can propose a new working group. And we're not limited to these 4. These are the 4 initial working groups we're doing. So with that, I think, Alex, we're ready to go over to questions. I'll put up this picture of the stack so we can refer to it as we're giving answers if that's helpful. And let's hit the question queue.
Awesome. Yeah, let's do that. Give me a moment because we have a long list here. So I'm just gonna bring them up chronologically, so we might have some of them repeat themselves. And I suggest, Drummond, if okay, maybe you can distribute them between Mike and Daryl and you, and then you see which
Sure.
in which order you reply to them. Okay. So let's start with the first question from Ralph. He's asking why peer DIDs are preferred and not W3C DID with JOT token and universal resolver as minimal standard.
Okay, I'd say a fairly common. So first, let me point out that we in the stack diagram we call out peer DIDs as an option for having establishing peer-to-peer connections that do not need to use a public utility. Now, peer DIDs are exchanged directly at layer 2 between agents and the respective wallets, any two devices, anywhere. And that protocol, the peer DID specification, I believe it's headed to the identifier working group at the Decentralized Identity Foundation. So it is simply an option for DIDs. You don't have to use peer DIDs. You can use public DIDs anchored in some public utility. They're all configuration options, and again, different governance frameworks may have different expectations. I will say quickly that there are several formats in the W3C verifiable credential specification. JOTS, JWT is one of them, and certainly there are many uses for JOT credentials. They do not have some of the privacy preservation properties of the zero knowledge proof credentials that are used by the Hyperledger Ares project. And there's also the JSON LD based credentials that have even a third set. There's a lot of innovation going on in that space right now. So I wouldn't, the stack is not yet nailed down to any particular credential format or credential exchange protocol. We do emphasize DIDCOM at layer 2 because this is what we call the narrow waist of the stack. Folks are familiar with the TCP/IP stack. It also has a narrow waist, a single protocol in the center called IP, and we believe DIDCOM will be the narrow waist of this stack. So there's some opinionation there, but even that is still to be determined. There's a CHAPI protocol, Credential Handler API protocol, that's being worked on at W3C. And we had a session at Internet Identity Workshop last week that talked about that. It's a very different protocol for really solving inter application communications in a browser, and will work nicely with DIDCOM as a peer-to-peer messaging protocol. So I hope that helps with that question.
Yeah, I just gonna bring up two more questions from Ralph because they're all kind of interrelated, and then you can see how you want to answer them. So the other one from Ralph is peer DIDs with zero knowledge proofs are not yet part of the W3C diff standard. Is it planned to bring it into the DIDCOM working group at diff by Evenem, Sovereign, or anyone else?
So as I said, peer DIDs are a DID method that's conformant with the DID specification at W3C. Again, that's not final, but I don't see any issues arising around the peer DIDs as one valid kind of DID method. The peer DID specification, I believe, is headed into the identifier working group at DIF, the Decentralized Identity Foundation. It could go into the DIDCOM working group, whichever one is a better home. But the whole thing is it's open standard specification. Again, just one type of DID out of the 4 different categories we covered in a much longer SSI Meetup webinar a few months back. So yeah, I think they'll be fully standardized. And I forgot the second half of the question.
Second half, is it planned to bring it into the DIDCOM working group at diff by Evenem, Sovereign, or anyone else?
Yes. So like I said, it will be going either into the DIDCOM working group or the identifier working group at DIF.
Awesome. So, and the other one from Ralph is what are examples of the governance frameworks products for the different layers in addition to Hyperledger, Indy, Ares, and or Sovereign?
So one thing about governance frameworks, they might specify technologies, but they are technology independent themselves. In other words, governance framework is a document produced we talk about the BLT sandwich, the business, legal, and technical policies for a particular trust community. And so the technical policies may specify particular profiles of components of the technical stack in order to say, in our community, you're going to use certain technologies in order to have interoperability. Now, the more mature the technical stack gets, the less it will be necessary to do that in a governance framework, and you'll be able to just generally reference whole portions of the stack. But the idea is governance authorities decide what they need for the requirements of their community at any level. So I don't want to confuse. A governance framework is not intended to be technology specific. In fact, that's the whole point, is being technology agnostic, so that technologies can evolve and the governance framework can stay as stable as possible.
Awesome. And I have two questions here from Kalia. So one is, what type of threat modeling have you done on the proposed models and solutions?
That is a great question, and I'm going to push that one over at Daryl.
That was a setup. I think that's one of the areas, Kalia, that the Trust Over IP Foundation, as well as the other tech groups, really need to start working on. When we look at, for example, we've had numerous government groups take a look at particular implementations of layer 1 implementations. They are bringing in some of the security services to take a look at and do some of that threat modeling. The hopes are that some of those will come out as more formally available, but also more formally funded and supported, because this is where you end up in the Mike was mentioning that business is not afraid to throw down here. What they've been afraid to do is play with tech. When you look at the overall business picture, tech is a part of the solution, which also includes things like threat modeling. How do you fund and allocate and get that stuff done? That's part of what we'll be looking at over time.
I was going to add, Daryl, that Daniel Hardman who's been very active in the Hyperledger projects and also in the DIDCOM specifications, has done a couple documents. I'm trying to remember, it's a very searchable title on one of them. That's basically, it's a threat model for verifiable credentials.
Yep.
And he started the work and then continued it. I think there was a whole working team at a Rebooting Web of Trust conference that turned that into a longer paper. And it's yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, and again, definitely, I've seen the document. Daniel did a very good job on the vectors of attack and the problems and recovery. I think also CLIA is looking at, I've had discussions with CLIA as well as others. What about the human aspects? What about the fact that you are creating a system, for example, there's also talk about COVID credentials right now. Are you creating a system that by nature, by unintentional consequence, but by nature excludes a whole bunch of different types of people, whether those be those who have lesser means financially or education, or there are accessibility threats that you've introduced by putting some of these technologies in place. So it's a much broader picture than the pure crypto analysis that needs to be done.
Yeah. I definitely agree. The whole question of inclusiveness with the stack, you don't see a guardian role here specifically called out here, but the need for this infrastructure to accommodate folks that literally may have no internet access or no devices at all, but still be able to take advantage of Trust Over IP infrastructure for their trust needs is a critical one. And I recommend the Sovereign Guardianship Working Group has published a white paper on that you can find on the sovereign.org website. Okay, Alex, next question.
Yeah, this one is from Kalia. It is a suggestion, but you might want to comment on it. So the people behind this are basically all men and all of European descent. Why should women and people of color have any confidence in these systems when we have not been involved in their creation?
Super good question. Mike, I don't know if you or Dell, if who wants to volunteer and answer that. I unfortunately have discussed that with Kalia, and I don't have a good answer because it's one of the It's one of the areas where, when you have a membership organization, it's comprised of the members that come and they, put forth their own representatives. And so we've seen what's, who's come to the table. There are, relatively few. There are a few women, but it's internationally reasonably diverse, but by gender and race, it's not nearly as diverse as we would like. So I don't have a good answer. I'm going to ask Daryl or Mike what ideas they have.
It's something that definitely, Clay and I have discussed this. It's something that, as a tall white dude, I'm in some ways clueless, but I'm also very sensitive to the fact that it's not. We're nowhere near where we need to be. One thing I am happy about, we did go through in some of the insistence when we first started creating the foundation, is that one, it wasn't all just big companies. Two, that the steering members and invited experts can form part of the steering committee. They don't have to necessarily come from one of the funding organizations, which opens up in some ways. That said, I think it's one of the key things we need to work on is the over time, how do you make this more diverse?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say that, as Drummond indicated earlier, right, anybody can get involved here, so that barrier of entry is pretty low. There's a lot of organizations even on the steering committee that are not large organizations, right? They just had a passion and an interest to get involved. And it's a great question, and it's a problem, right? But I would say, the foundation is here, open arms, right? And we would absolutely, speaking for myself personally, love to have more interaction from all different walks, because you learn so much from different opinions, different points of view. And I've said this about, in our tech community all the time. We all go to like an IAW or some other workshop, and there's all these really highly technical people. And the first one I went to, I was total fish out of water. I just felt so overwhelmed by the level of, the discussions that were going on. And I see trust over IP is really, it's it's abstracting all of the really highly technical things and saying, whoever you are, whatever your interest is, and wherever you're from, there's a place you can plug in. There absolutely is a place you can plug in. And that's the most exciting thing about what we're doing, is it provides such rich opportunity for everyone to contribute, if and we're hoping they find.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing that I think is a very important point. Is very, again, commonly confused when folks see the stack and they hear about it. They say, oh, you're going to dictate how trust on the internet works. And I like to, or I try to point out immediately, no, we're designing, it's a little bit like saying, we're designing the internet, you are the one who determines how it works and what you're going to use it for. Now, all technology, even governance, still has structural decisions involved. But what I like to emphasize about the stack is we don't at all say who's a governance authority where. Any community of any size, anywhere, can be a governance authority for whatever their community needs. And the stack is there to serve them, to give them tools. And so, we're here to produce something that empowers those communities. And that's one community or a whole group of communities that need a lot of empowerment. So we're trying to provide tools that will help. All right, Alex, I don't know how we're doing time-wise. I know we're already a little over. I can keep going for a little bit. I don't know, Daryl, Mike, how are you guys?
I'm good.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, we have many more questions. I mean, we have like about 10, 15 more questions sitting here. So
I'm
I
out.
mean, it's for you guys to decide how you want to how quick you want to answer them.
Well,
Okay.
let's keep going. Yeah, let's see how far we can get.
Okay, so next one from Mohammed. He's saying, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, which means in Latin, who watches the watchers? Meaning, how do we trust issuers? At the end, we again come to centralized government agency we call as a root that we trust.
So, I mean,
Daryl, it sounds like you want to jump on that one.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. That's certainly going to be true in some aspects. Like if you take a look at passports, birth certificates, yes, they are the root of trust to a certain extent. when you have, for example, full-scale regime change and old systems are burned and you have effectively ethnicities erased, because of the approaches we're taking here, there still will be record. The question is, will the outside world, outside of the country that has just changed regime, for example, recognize those records? We've seen massive refugee systems where effectively the countries disown them, they have to leave, they have nothing. There is no traceable way back to who am I, where'd I come from? That can be fixed if you still believe, because if that government changes outright, you can trust the old one. It isn't there anymore, but the anchors of digital trust are still there. Over time, though, some of the more trustable systems, I imagine, are going to evolve. If we took a look, for example, at, and this would be a bad example, but analogous, arguably, if you have a reputation on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, that might be a more valuable asset to you right now than is some, a piece of information on your resume or your degree. Over time, we're going to have informal trust networks evolve that are truly decentralized, where there's a reputation score or something that can float around. The question you'll have to ask yourself underneath it is, how do I know I can trust that reputation network? That's what the trust over IP side is about, is how do you trust the network? How do you know the governance? And if it evolves truly decentralized, beautiful. That's it.
Yep. Mike, you want to say anything else? I'll add one more thing when you're done.
Go ahead, Drummond. I've got nothing there.
Okay. As I said earlier, and I as soon as you see governance authority or people hear the term, they think, okay, government or large centralized issuer of some kind. And certainly those are some of the best known today. But one of the reasons I've been passionate about building this stack is because I believe it fundamentally that the peer-to-peer nature and the decentralized cryptographic infrastructure that we're building here will support any trust community of any kind. And in particular, what's already been brought up earlier on this call, the web of trust model. And in the web of trust model, you don't have to rely on centralized authorities. Every peer in any community decides what peers it trusts for what information. So I want to double down on what Daryl was saying about decentralized trust models, peer-to-peer and web of trust models. They are entirely possible. There is nothing about the architecture we're creating that favors centralized systems. There's also nothing that turns around, and other than the fact that it opens up the other options, it also accommodates centralized systems. That's why governments should be able to say, hey, we still want to issue, like European governments issue this EIDAS, they all issue identity credentials to their citizens. They go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in with another example, Drum, if I could.
Sure, go ahead.
I was just thinking about, as I mentioned, one of the hats I wear is I'm Chief Technology Officer for CU Ledger, which serves the global financial cooperative credit union movement. Which almost by definition, other than the fact that they're regulated by governments in most countries, they are created as decentralized organizations. If you go back to the history, almost every credit union has a story something like the following. 85 years ago, Johnny had a barn got blown down in a tornado, and the community pitched together, 25 people lent him money, and a credit union was formed. They are the ultimate decentralized finance groups. And that's what CU Ledger is doing, is enabling this effectively. It's really decentralized in so many aspects, yet we also want to be able to move money from Kenya to the United States, from the United States to the Philippines. So there are definitely some centralized play in there, but fundamentally speaking, it is a decentralized system, all of which though anchor largely to centralized government for identity. But credit unions themselves have a desire and a mandate to bank the unbanked, to help finance those who have no access to finance. So there are, there's hopes that those rules, some of the rules can be changed. If it's in country, we don't have to worry about anti-money laundering laws if we can keep the money in the same country. So there are moves already in play that are really decentralized.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say there is the lower we create the friction to be able to establish trust at a peer-to-peer level, right? The easier this stack makes it for any governance authority, anyone who wants to say, I can produce the policies for trust among a community of any size, and you can then instantiate it using the technology. The easier it will be to move away from reliance on large centralized issuers. So probably beaten that question to death there, Alex. Next.
Okay, and this is somehow related, so you can decide how extensively you want to answer it. And Antonio is asking, why, Jed, are we working in a model that represents a government or a business? They're artificial entities that only represent a group or people in a time frame. So its attestation could be represented as an individual that can act as an entity during a time frame.
I hope by now that we've answered that question, that even though the current implementations of verifiable credentials, and I know for Evernym, we have, speaking with that hat on, we have emphasized solutions for enterprises and businesses to be able to issue credentials, because that's where the early market is. We're already seeing the demand for to make that available for individuals. As I've said earlier, anyone should be able to hold any of these three roles: to issue credentials, hold them, or verify them. And we'll absolutely have personal issuance and personal verification. So as it evolves, I don't think there's, I mean, businesses and governance and other institutions exist for various reasons, and just bringing about decentralized infrastructure is not going to immediately dissolve all those institutions. It will allow much more decentralized ways of doing this, of doing many of the things that they do, and that I think will be very transformative in society. I know, Alex, that the book we've been working on for the last 18 months or so has entire chapters that talk about the impact of decentralization on society.
Okay, so Ismail is asking, is there any qualifying registry for trusted providers or trusted verifiers? I mean, I'm just going to bring up both questions that Ismail is asking, so you can answer both of them at the same time. And then he's saying also, any considerations for resolvable incidental mechanisms in case of conflict or incidents? Is there a mechanism to resolve such automatically in a technical way?
Ooh.
I can give a concrete example of the first one.
Sure.
Quite often what we're looking at is, where's the official list of the issuers and stuff. BC government, though, is doing a very particular project with regard to lawyers in the province. And the reason they're doing this is the provinces were not doing a very good job of serving Indigenous people's needs. The Supreme Court of Canada said you need to find a way to allow rapid access for the lawyers to the audio recordings instead of a typed in version of the court proceedings. The problem is only the lawyer is allowed to hear that, not the lawyer's clerk, not the administrative person, and nobody else is allowed this. So they're trying to figure out, well, how do I know you're really a lawyer? I may know you're really Drummond Reed, but are you really a lawyer? Well, in BC, British Columbia, there's the Law Society of British Columbia. They are the de facto issuer of law licenses in that particular province. The same thing is true in many, many places. There is somewhere a root of trust that's already there, or in the case that you don't have one, create one. So in this case, actually, I'll finish that one off. The Law Society of British Columbia issues a verifiable credential that is checked for before they release and allow the audio to be streamed. It goes and looks for a verifiable credential issued by the Law Society that has to be in the hands of the lawyer on their own device. That allows the audio, in this case, for the recording of the court, to be played. So they did go and find the authority. You likely already have them.
Right, I agree with Daryl. Many of those authorities exist, and what will be possible with this infrastructure is to spread that out and decentralize it and say whatever information you need verified, whatever issuer it's possible to get that from, they can set that up and make that information available, and they don't have to build the whole cryptographic infrastructure to do it. That's why there's such a barrier today. Once once that infrastructure is available and it's really commoditized, it will be far easier to establish new lines of trust and new policies and trust communities, dynamically as they're needed.
Yeah, and it's important to unpack that too a little bit. I mean, that's exactly right. And we've said this a few times, but it bears repeating. This is going to evolve. So the initial trust fabric, if you will, that an organization may deploy could be as controlled or as small as I'm going to give a credential to an employee that they can bring back to me. I mean, it could be that, and that's a perfectly good use of the technology. It's fine. But over time, they're going to say, well, wait a minute. If all of my employees have state issued driver's license that live in the same thing, or whatever the credential is that happens to live in the same place, why am I having to issue all these different things? And that's when the technology really starts to pick up speed and snowball, because you're now leveraging things that are out already, and you don't have to continually issue over and over and over again these things. So I think it's a great point, and it's definitely, I see a very gradual progression that entities will use to grow their adoption and their use of the technology.
It's that, I love that phrase. It's gradual until it's sudden. And I think that's what we're still in the gradual phase right now, but get ready, because the appetite we're seeing out there for digital credentials, verifiable credentials is enormous. And as the first real useful production credentials get out there, I think it's just the network effect will start to kick in. It won't happen overnight, because this is trust infrastructure and it never evolves at the speed of light. It's actually got to be verified and reviewed, and then ultimately, in many cases certified, and then it can really go into broad use. But again, since it can accommodate different trust communities, different use cases, just like the internet. No one put out an edict and said, this is what you must use the internet for. It became a capability that many developers and businesses and communities started to say, hey, this is what we can go do with it. I think we'll see the same kind of organic growth here.
Yep,
Chris is
I agree.
asking, yeah, sorry. Should I go to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Chris is asking, is the Trust Over IP Foundation thinking about the artificial general intelligence world in a future sense? GPT-2 and algorithms are ruling the world today.
Oh, that's such a good question. I'm going to, Mike or Daryl, either one of you.
Sounds like you're all over it, Drum.
I'm equally silent.
Well, when that question comes up, I like to point to the term agent at layer 2, and just share the view that I've always liked that term. As nebulous as it is, and earlier in my career, I actually avoided that term like the plague, because early work that I was doing and what is layer 2 and the protocols involved there, we talked about agents and we got constantly confused with all kinds of, there's just decades of history in agent technology, and of course now it's much more differentiated, and AI is definitely a whole branch. But the reason I like the term is because I think the agents that we'll all be using as individuals, as businesses, and even the agents representing things are just going to get smarter and smarter. And using this infrastructure, they're going to be able to take advantage of AI that does not have to be as centralized as it is today. So it's a very broad answer to your question, but I think over time, AI will play a more and more important role in empowering the agents that are interacting in this digital trust infrastructure. You think of it as almost like we're creating, in some ways, the internet of agents here. And those agents are all going to be able to employ AI. And I hate to say it, it won't, just like the internet, won't always be for good, right? We'll have agents out there that are using AI for things that we would, we would not like to see. But that's evolution, and the fact that we could use agents for on our personal behalf and not just have to rely on AI technology coming from large companies, I think that will be very empowering.
So what you're saying, Drum, is Jarvis could actually work for me, not Amazon?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I'm serious about that. And I know there are companies in the space that are already starting to look at that. I can't say that we have any in the Trust Over IP Foundation yet, but I know of at least one that is contemplating that.
Okay, next question is for you, Drummond, coming from Mohammed. He's saying, since we are building a trust over IP framework with governance in the middle, is the solution to possible civil attacks in decentralized systems where you can get, example, one verifiable credential issued by a formal issuer which favors you. However, after some time, you get issued a new verifiable credential from the formal issuer, but however, you can still go on presenting the same old verifiable credential. Do you foresee some possible solution on the governance layers?
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a tough one.
Okay. It's quite, use an analogy. Certainly the technology-wise, if you need to get revocation and is this current right now, you can do that on a tech basis. We do this in the real world right now. People use expired driver's licenses. They may have, have to prove their age, yet their driver's license is no longer valid. It's a question of what are you verifying the credential for, which implies your governance framework. If you have to prove that I have the right to drive, that's a different question than am I currently residing in Ontario? And at one point the government said, this is Daryl, here's his date of birth, and he was in Ontario then. That's your governance framework. You get to make that decision. I think that's what's one of the cool things. It's not being imposed upon you.
Yeah, I totally agree. If I heard the question right, Alex, it had the presumption with governments in the middle of the Trust Over IP stack. I want to really strongly reinforce governance. It does not mean governments. Governance can be, from any entity of any size anywhere. So
you could have a poker game that has governance.
Absolutely,
you can have rules.
You can have a family that puts together a governance framework, and I expect they will be out there for a set of credentials. I mean, if you issue credentials that on your family set of smartphones can actually be used to unlock and drive the car, you can have governance over how far your kids can take that car and what hours of the day they can drive, and whether they're responsible for refilling it with gas, and their key stops working until they've done that, right? That's examples of the types of things you can control with credentials and governance frameworks in a little trust network. It doesn't extend beyond your own family. So it's highly flexible. It's the internet of agents, internet of trust, and it applies at any scale, anywhere. So sometimes I worry about the. Go ahead.
Now I know why your son's a lawyer.
Yeah, and I had parents and grandparents are lawyers too, so I do tend to live right in the middle of these two things. Okay, I hope that helped. Next question in there, Alex.
Yeah. Attila, he's asking, what prevents the Trust Over IP solution from gatekeepers infiltrating the governance systems on all layers?
Ooh. Well, okay, so I know my answer, but Mike or Daryl, do you want to volunteer anything there?
The Trust Over IP is kind of creating the frameworks for it. It's not defining the governance. It's the groups who adopt the governance that actually define. If they go through and you might want to take, for example, the driver's license groups, which arguably speaking are heavily centralized right now, they're likely to lean more centralized. But as you move into other areas, why would you, as any group, adopt a standard or a template that forces you to lean one way? You need to look at these templates and use them, not just adopt them wholesale. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, let me use another example here. Again, I mentioned the digital trust ecosystem. I expect, we already see it evolving for the higher education or the education, industry as a whole worldwide. we will have thousands, tens of thousands of educational institutions with their own governance frameworks, right? We literally want to make it as easy as, I mean, especially for universities that, the different departments there turn around and say, hey, we've got this, just like we discovered a bunch of uses for the internet, and they now have a lot of digital education, initiatives going on, especially with students all studying online. They turn around and say, oh, we've got these new tools for trust. We can build our own governance framework, issue credentials for all the things we need, and some of them just for while you're going to school, some of them credentials issued for the rest of your life, right? Your ongoing learning. Now, there are thousands of governance authorities and governance frameworks involved there. They're all, if they follow the Trust Over IP stack, they'll all have DIDs. They'll all be referenceable. But the idea that you could go and somehow infiltrate all of those to manipulate them it'd be a little bit like saying, yeah, I can figure out a way to go infiltrate all the websites out there, or many of them. I think governance in many ways is the least attackable part of it, because it's the human rules. It's the machine-based systems. Are we going to get viruses or bugs in the cryptographic code implementing things on the right side, on the technology side of the stack? Absolutely. Look at the Heartbleed bug that happened with SSL. But again, if there's a robust ecosystem of vendors and products and open source projects working on that, the more diversity we have, the harder it will be to go in and create some kind of widespread attack.
Excellent. We have our last 4 questions now. So Kalia is asking, are you doing social threat modeling to addressing the needs of risk of people in risk to sorry, let me rephrase this. Are you doing social threat modeling to addressing the needs of people that are in risk to be marginalized?
My short answer to that is we absolutely need to do that, and I think it is the kind of work that could well belong at the Trust Over IP Foundation. It's understanding the threats to digital trust of any kind using the stack. I think is absolutely one of the things that we should be attending to, and we welcome everyone interested in that problem. Setting up a working group, attracting funding for that. All these things are possible with the Linux Foundation project.
Okay. Last 2 questions. Chris is asking, and I'm saying this, if anyone else wants to pick the brains of these 3 gentlemen, that's the moment is to do that is right now. So Chris is asking, a futuristic scenario is Trust Over IP should help if I send my agent to pick up food, or my self-driving car to pick up some physical thing. So again, this is a layer 2 play, I assume. And then Chris is adding, with quantum getting popular, there's a chance to future-proof some of the cryptographic stuff be quantum-proof, safe from being hacked.
I am not an expert in cryptography. Daryl does it in his sleep, but I think quantum proofing any of the cryptographic components of the technology stack and/or governance frameworks actually requiring that, as a form of future proofing is, it's a good practice. I learned a lot about that when working on the decentralized key management design and architecture work that we did 2 years ago. And I'm really a believer that we do need to have quantum proof, what are often called emergency keys in DID documents, and that kind of robustness built into the infrastructure.
Excellent. Last question, which I think fits really well to finish off the question session. What is the URL where people or companies can register for Trust Over IP membership and/or working groups? And this question is by Ralph.
Oh, wow, that is a really good one, because I believe it's right on the final slide. Thank you very much, Ralph, for asking. So, it's funny. I think there were 8 different variants of the potential, or even more than that, of what we could call the website. And I think the Linux Foundation is registered a number of them so they can all redirect. But in the end, we just said, hey, the easiest is just spell it out, trustoverip.org. And thank you, Daryl, for actually jumping on and reserving the Twitter handle trustoverip. So
between John and I, we had everybody hostage.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. I've been through this. This is actually org number 8 for me. But when a community of folks that are all well-intentioned drive towards the same purpose, it's been an amazing experience to pull this together. And I have to say, working with the Linux Foundation team, they have been awesome. They have been innovating legally. They've been fantastic support on the membership development and the website, all the organizational support you need to put together an effort like this. I think it's going to be a great pleasure. I can see why they host as many organizations as they do. And one more thing I want to say, if you're looking at saying, well, I want to use Trust over IP. I don't necessarily want to work on the stack, but I want to go, create something based on it. Particularly, you want to build a governance framework or assemble a governance authority. The Linux Foundation is literally adding both legal and logistical support for doing that if you want your project at the Linux Foundation. There's no need to do it. You can establish that any place you want, anywhere in the world. But if you're interested in saying, hey, I'd like to take advantage of this infrastructure to develop a governance framework in my community and have support for implementing and testing the technology, they are very interested in that, and they will gladly talk to you about their project. That's what those 2 Foundry working groups are about. The first 2 at utility at layer 1 and layer 4, but we will start them up at layers 2 or 3 if you're interested there too. So thank you, Alex. It's as usual, the questions just overflow it. That's why I love doing SSI Meetup webinars.
No, that's great. And any final thoughts from Mike and Daryl? Anything you want to share before we round up?
Just quickly, no. I mean, it's a great pleasure to be part of this. It is exciting. It's going to be transformative, and we welcome all to come and help with this effort. Plug in and help where you can, and help drive it forward. It really has enormous potential, and I feel like we're really close to kind of turning a corner and seeing some quick acceleration. So, thank you very much, Alex, for hosting, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Mike. And
The only thing I would add is that the one thing that still bugs me, and I mentioned it earlier, and Kalia brought it up, is we need more diversity of all kinds. So if you want to join, please do. Yeah, that's it for me.
Absolutely. And I want to, again, double down on that. There is a path for any individual, any organization, no cost, to come join, be part of the community, work on any aspect of the stack that matters to you. And the last plug I'll put in is this whole webinar was a warm-up for a couple of us for the 2 live launch events that the Linux Foundation is hosting day after tomorrow on Thursday, May 7th. Again, the first one will begin at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Unfortunately, some of the early press that went out had 9 a.m. Pacific time, but it's not. It's 8 to 9:30. It's a 90-minute launch event. And the second one is at 6 o'clock in the evening Pacific time on Thursday for the APAC timeframe. And you can get more information about either one of those signing up. There'll be Zoom webinars at the URL you see in front of you, trustoverip.org. And I'm certain we can share it via SSI Meetup as well. And once again, Alex, thank you for hosting. We wanted, having talked to this audience for, the better part of almost a year now about Trust ORP, it's so great to be doing. You're the first, public announcement we've been doing since the press release went out this morning. So thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you so much for you guys for taking the time for sharing this as a starting point here with SSI Meetup and a global community of people interested in SSI. So thank you so much for that. And for everyone else, if you're interested in learning more about other SSI Meetups, please join our newsletter on the website, or you can join our different social media channels, Telegram, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. We have a lot of stuff coming up in the coming weeks. So in 2 days, we will be doing a webinar about the ADAS bridge with Nacho Alamillo, who's the lawyer who defined the ADAS bridge together with the European Commission as a project they did for the European Commission. Next week, Tuesday the 12th, we have a session about the Korean SSI ecosystem. As many of you will know, a lot of this SSI stuff has been happening in North America, Europe, but Korea is coming very strong too in the last 2 years, together with Australia and New Zealand. So we will have that session with Jae-Sean Shim, who created SSI Meetup Korea, to promote SSI over there. Then we have also coming up on the 20th, the ceramic protocol from Freebox, where the CTO will be talking about the new ceramic protocol they're working on. And finally, by the end of the month, we will have a special decentralized key management session also. So plenty of stuff coming up. If you want to learn about all this, please sign up to the newsletter or follow all the different social media channels. And congratulations to the Trust Over IP Foundation. Thank you so much, Drummond, as always, for being part of all this. And thank you so much, Mike, for joining us for the first time. Daryl, I think it's your second time. And I hope to talk to all of you soon again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alex.
My pleasure. Thank you.